Tuesday, August 15th, 2023, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So it's been 52 years that we've had a IOU nothing currency world. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the major reserve currency of the world is backed by nothing because on August 15th, 1971, of course, President Nixon defaulted on the U.S. Treasury's international obligations. It's more commonly known as the closing of the gold window. So before we look into why that happened and the consequences of those actions and how did they decide to take that action on that Sunday on August 15th, 1971, we're going to listen to exactly what President Nixon said. So here is a clip of what he said on that Sunday.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system.
So as you can see, he said that the United States was going to suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold and other reserve assets temporarily. Well, that was 52 years ago, so it's still the United States Treasury technically is still in default in default to many sovereign nations, and it still owes thousands of metric tons of gold at $35 an ounce. And that's a very important point, I would say, because we hear from a lot of people who I won't mention names that the dollar is still king. It's going to go through the roof because if you want to de-dollarize, you have to pay your debts in dollars. But I'm sorry to burst your bubble, and you probably know who you are if you're watching this, and you probably don't. But the U.S. owes a lot more, I think, in terms of real money than all the BRICS, Global South, or even the U.S.'s friends and allies owe. So let's get on with it then. Why it happened? Well, I'll give a very brief summary of why it happened. During World War II, towards the end of World War II in 1945, the U.S. had most of the official gold reserves of the world, and they probably knew that the war was near its end, so they drew up this new system called the Bretton Woods system, or the Bretton Woods Agreement, and they fixed the price of gold to the dollar, so $35 for every troy ounce. And if you had $35 as a foreign nation, you could go to the U.S. Treasury and get an ounce of gold. The other currencies, they were fixed to the dollar, but you couldn't take British pounds or Dutch guilders or Deutschmarks and convert them into gold. Let's say Brazil had a surplus of Deutschmarks. They couldn't go to the German Bundesbank and ask for the gold. They had to convert the Deutschmarks into dollars and then get the gold from the United States. So the U.S. controlled that. But by the late 1960s, the U.S. had started abusing that. And how do they do that? Well, as President de Gaulle and his finance minister at the time, I think Giscard d'Estaing, said, the U.S. had the exorbitant privilege to just print the money and spend. And they noticed it, not just the French, but other major trading partners. And because the U.S. was overspending with the Vietnam War, and was overspending on social programs, the Great Society program of Lyndon Johnson that kicked off, I think, in 1965. So by 1971, the week before August 15th. August 15th was on a Sunday. There were huge demands for gold, for converting dollars into gold, not just by the French, but the British as well. And it would have wiped out the Treasury's gold reserves. They would have gone bankrupt. So there were three options to solve the problem. And one of the guys that was in charge was the guy who went on to become chairman of the Federal Reserve and had to let rates rise to 20% in 1980. Yes, it was Paul Volcker. So what was Paul Volcker doing in 1971? Well, he was Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Monetary Affairs, and he knew John Exter very well because they worked together at the New York Fed, Chase Manhattan Bank. And John Exter was very knowledgeable in international monetary affairs, of course. And he advised Paul Volcker. He wasn't at Camp David, the meeting where they decided to close the gold window. They had the meeting at Camp David. But from what I've read, I read an interview that John Exter did years ago, and it was online. I haven't got it with me, but he said that Paul Volcker contacted him. And John Exter said, we've got three choices. The first one is to raise interest rates to stop the flow of gold out. By raising interest rates, they would encourage the French, the British, and others to actually hold on to their not fiat, but to the currency and not ask for the gold. The other one was to devalue the dollar. So at the time, you needed $35 for 1 troy ounce. They could have devalued by 10%, raised the price of convertibility to like $38.50. And then John Exter actually told Paul Volcker, well, there is a kind of nuclear option, which is to default, to close the gold window. And that's what they decided to do. And when I went to university, I started my economics degree, which I also used to do my final degree, which is economics and international relations. The professors, they went over this closing of the gold window. They didn't even spend a minute on it. They just said, oh, Nixon closed the gold window. They never talked about the consequences of it, the historical consequence and what it meant. But many people, of course, a lot of times they look at charts, long-term charts especially, and they say, what happened in the early 70s? How come this chart is gone ballistic? Well, it's because for the first time in modern, not even modern, but in the last few thousand years, the major currency of the world, that major reserve currency, became nothing. It was an I owe you nothing. And who coined the term I owe you nothing? Well, it was John Exter, and he should know because he advised Paul Volcker in 1971, and he wrote about it, as you can see here, in 1972. So what that did is that unanchored the whole system. It allowed the United States and the globalists. Is it any wonder that the World Economic Forum was created with the help of Henry Kissinger, who worked for the Nixon administration, and Klaus Schwab in 1971, because the globalists knew they had a blank check from you. That's right. As you can see here, this was supposed to be Nixon's recovery plan for America and maybe for the world, right? But I would say it was Nixon's, or the globalists' multi-generational wealth extraction plan from us to the 0.01%. It's not even the top 1% anymore. And that's what's happened. They've been able, without the anchor and the chains of gold, so to speak, to basically do whatever they want, spend as much as they want. And that's why we are where we are right now. Where are we going to go? Well, hopefully this whole system will implode somehow. It could be a melt-up hyperinflation. It will eventually be a total collapse. But what I think will happen is that real things, real necessities, not frivolities and ephemeral financial wealth, is going to be more important in relative terms. And that's why I keep saying that hard assets, gold and silver, are the place to be. Yes, it is frustrating sometimes in the short term. And why do I say that? Well, I think this guy here on Twitter, Gabor Gurbax, he's described it really well, what's happened since 1971. He says the average U.S. annual income in 1971 paid off a house in approximately 2.5 years, could buy 3 new cars in a year, send 4 kids to Harvard in a year, and easily afford food, shelter, necessities, and entertainment. The older generation doesn't understand the difficulties the young face today. Yes, and there are other factors that have affected this, but I think the biggest underlying reason was Nixon's decision to basically rip the system apart, take gold off the system. Of course, President Roosevelt, FDR, did the same. He closed the gold window for Americans back in 1933. So now the whole world had its gold window closed. And is it any wonder that in exactly a week's time, the BRICS summit, which is made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are going to meet and probably talk about accelerating the move away from this system, a system where the bankers control the money and they just can print money and buy whatever they want. They can punish people through sanctions. And I think that's what it's all about. Many people think, like the people who think the dollar is still going to be king. But if you look at this chart, since 1971, and this is how many grams of gold $1 buys. So back in 1971, you could buy 3/4 of a gram of gold. And now you can only buy 0.0163. And the dollar's lost 98% of its value versus real money. So for those who think the dollar is king, they're looking at a different animal. They're comparing the dollar to the other IOU nothing currencies. You need to compare it to real money. And I think that's what will happen. The whole system is going to implode, as I said. And it's not going to be pretty, but I think the aftermath, in the aftermath of it, it will be something better, hopefully. And we're seeing symptoms of that with what happened in Argentina politically. They've had this kind of inflationary system even before the Bretton Woods system was ripped apart. And now they want to move to a system where there are no central banks. We'll see if Javier Milei succeeds in becoming president. Some people think he might not, but I think that's a symptom of it. And the other thing that this is had the consequence of doing, of course, is allowed America to spend more than it really should. Internationally, as you can see here, the U.S. trade balance, again, early 70s, things really changed, right? It's all because of what Nixon decided to do on August 15th, 1971. It was the worst monetary decision of the last, I don't know, a few thousand years, to be honest. And it's led to a lot of troubles for the world, because you've had a group of people with a lot of power being able just to create this funny money out of thin air, and they're still being able to do it. So it might seem really catastrophic when the system implodes, but it's probably the best thing that could happen to us and future generations. And I won't look at the markets today because I'm going to go out a little earlier today. I'm going to go play golf. But just a little story of when I was 5 years old, and it was 1970, in the summer 1970. And by then, I guess I was old enough to travel. And my dad used to have to travel a lot for business from Brazil to other places around the world. And he took us for the first time on a business trip. It was for pleasure as well. He mixed things together. He had his own business, and we were in New York. And I remember walking out of the lobby of the hotel to go out with my parents, and walking the other way towards me was President Nixon. And I said to my parents, "Look, it's President Nixon." And they went, "You don't say that." And I'm 5 years old. And he actually winked at me, and I walked past him. And little did I know that about a year later, he did that. And even a year later, had no idea how consequential that decision was. So hopefully, with what I've learned and studied about money, about gold and the system, I'll be able to be of some service to you and to other people, so that you can survive through this period financially, and maybe even thrive if you are able to be in the right place. And by that I mean, of course, gold and silver and intangibles, and not to and maybe also to diversify. As Clive Thompson says, you have to diversify. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. But I think the most important thing that we need to focus on is the basic necessities, because if you have shelter, if you have food, if you have transport, all the basic necessities, you should do well. And of course, try to get out of debt as much as possible. Some people say, well, if it's going to hyperinflate, the debt is going to be written off. But in the meantime, it's going to get very expensive to service the debt. So you need to think about that. It's always better not to have any debt, in my opinion, if you can do it. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day. Take care. Bye.